This is lesson 3.4, using formulas. Our objective is we will use substitution in formulas and use the perimeter formula. So I want us to start out with thinking about the formula for the area of this rectangle and a formula for the perimeter of this rectangle. So go ahead, take a look at the variables that we're using, b and c, and come up with a formula. Now that you've had a second to do that, let's go ahead and talk about what it would be. So the area, length times width, or base times height. So we have b times c. Perimeter is a little bit trickier. You probably thought c plus b plus c plus b. Really, that's just 2 c's and 2 b's. So there we have two formulas that we could use for any value of b and c. So what are we doing when we use a formula? We talk about formulas all the time. Companies have formula, people have formulas, we see formulas in geometry. What we're doing, and you can write this in your guided notes, is we are evaluating. We have some sort of expression, and we're putting in a value for the variable. So we are substituting the letters for numbers. So let's think about one of the most important formulas in physics and in math. Distance equals rate times time. Remember, when two variables are next to each other, that means multiplication. D is distance, R is rate or the speed, and T is the time. So let's take a look at the first one. Suppose you travel 162 miles in 3 hours. What was your average rate? Make sure your rate is always in units, distance per time. So, depending on what our distance is, and depending on what our time is measured in, it would change what our rate unit was. So, for example, we have miles and hours, so our rate would be in miles per hour. Say we had yards and hours, it would be yards per hour. So pay special attention to that. So our important information, 162 and 3 hours. So we need to put those in for our variables. This would be our distance, and this would be our time. We can put it into the formula. 162 equals R times 3. Now we just have a simple one-step equation. We can divide both sides by 3, and we can figure out what our average rate is. Let's go ahead and do our division on the side here. So we know that our rate, our average rate, has to be 54 miles per hour. So just be really careful with your units on the rate. The next one we have, suppose you travel 165 miles in 9.75 hours. What is your average rate? Again, we would try the exact same formula. So distance equals rate times time. We have time and we have distance. We have to do the same process as before, undo the multiplication with division, and then we would have our rate. On these next examples, we're going to solve for a different variable. So suppose you drive 16 miles at 35 miles per hour. How long did it take you to drive the 16 miles? So here are our two important pieces of information. We have our distance, and we have our rate this time. 16 equals 35t. So we would have to divide both sides by 35. And in this case, our time is less than an hour. If we wanted to leave it as a fraction, that would be fine. Or you could put it into a decimal, but it would be in hours because we were working in miles per hour. The next one says, suppose you drive for 4 hours at 40 miles per hour. How far have you gone? The nice thing about this formula is that distance is what we're looking for, and distance is already isolated. 4 hours is our time, 40 miles per hour is our rate, so distance equals 40 times 4. 40 times 4, 4 times 4 is 16, add the 0, make sure we have our units, those are super, super important. Since it's in miles per hour, we know our distance is in miles. This is kind of a fun little thing to do on road trips. You can calculate how long you've been driving or how long till you get where you're going. It's a really neat little formula. We also have to use our perimeter formula, and that would be right here. 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. Now I know you all know how to find the perimeter, but now we're just going to be putting it into a formula. Our perimeter here, perimeter equals 2 times the length. So the length would be 16 and 8/10, and then the width would be 2 times 27 and 3/10. Make sure you follow your order of operations. We'd have to do the multiplication first and then add them. You can go ahead and try that on your calculator at home. The last type of formula we're going to see is a really neat one, actually, how you can calculate Celsius or Fahrenheit depending on what you're given. So the problem says, if you were in Europe and saw that it was 30 degrees Celsius, what temperature would it be in Fahrenheit? So we have this nice little conversion. Fahrenheit, we're going to take our 30 degrees Celsius and put it in for C. Now all we have to do is multiply. Make sure we move over our decimal point one place, which is the same as 54 plus 32. And we would have 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, next time you want to know the difference, you got a fun little formula to use. Here's your exit pass. You're going to do another Celsius to Fahrenheit, and we'll talk about it in class tomorrow.